Good morning, everyone. We're going to start. I think we have a good amount of people on the call. Again, good morning. My name is Latoya Smith, and I had the unit at the central bank responsible for external relations and external communications. Is my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's learning series webinar. Those of you who are joining one of these for the first time, by way of context or background, the Central Bank's Learning Series was developed about 2 years ago as a part of the bank's initiative to enhance public education and stakeholder engagement. This this particular outlet provides an opportunity for us to educate and inform the public, as well as give the public an opportunity to respond and engage in conversation and dialogue, whether it's through comments or through questions, being able to have your questions addressed. Today, we are discussing the important topic of investment, in particular, how Bahamian residents can access international investment opportunities through the investment currency market, and then the Bahamian Depository Receipts program. Our presenter for today is Ms. Ashley Bethel. Ashley has over 6 years of experience in the Exchange Control Department, where she currently serves as an assistant manager. She specializes in monitoring exchange control transactions with a strong emphasis on analyzing financial sector data and ensuring compliance with exchange control regulations. Ashley is very skilled at enforcing exchange control policies, and she works closely with the financial institutions to ensure that they are in compliance with delegated authority guidelines. So I'm certain that you will benefit from the knowledge she has to share today. Before I hand the floor over to Ashley, I just wanted to advise that your questions and any comments you may have can be reserved for the end of her presentation. So once her presentation has concluded, we will open the floor for questions. And with that, I will invite Ashley to take the floor.
Good morning, everyone. So this morning we'll be taking a look at the investment currency market and the Bahamian Depository Receipts. So we'll be going over what's the definition of the investment currency market, who's eligible to use it, defining residency in the context of exchange controls, how does it work, the liberalization measure, the redemption process. Then we'll move on to Bahamian Depository Receipts, where we'll define it, we'll discuss the participants, the limits, and the eligible investors. Taking a look at the investment currency market. The investment currency market is a facility established and supported by the central bank through which foreign exchange from the country's external reserves is made available to facilitate approved outward investments in foreign assets by residents. The ICM also allows for resident individuals and or their wholly Bahamian-owned companies to buy foreign currency at a premium to invest abroad. These include portfolio investments such as stocks, bonds, cryptocurrencies, etc., real estate, timeshare, employee stock options, grants, and purchases. So for example, a resident wanting to purchase a home abroad would be able to access foreign currency through the ICM. Also, a resident wishing to purchase Bitcoin or any other type of crypto from Coinbase.com or Kraken, for example, may complete that transaction. Another example is a resident wanting to purchase stock through an asset or investment manager abroad. Currently, the bid-buy rate is 5%. Who is eligible to use the ICM? Resident individuals and or their wholly Bahamian-owned companies. How do we define resident individuals in the Bahamas? Bahamian citizens, natural or naturalized, or permanent residents with no restrictions on employment. Also, we have resident wholly Bahamian-owned companies, and these are companies where all of the shares of the business are owned by Bahamians. How does it work? As you'll see on the right side of this screen, you'll see an ICM purchase form, and the form must be submitted for all real estate, including interest in time shares, employee stock option grants over $25,000, employee share purchase plans over $25,000, portfolio investments, and any other outward direct requests, investment requests. The form should be completed by each resident individual or resident wholly Bahamian-owned entity and submitted to ECD along with supporting documentation. What is the supporting documentation? So all applications require documenting evidence to confirm the immigration status of the applicant. For businesses, we require certificates of incorporation, designation letters, etc. of the entities involved. We also would require copies of licenses or approvals from local regulators. For real estate, we will require the copy of the executed sales agreement. For timeshares, the purchase of the agreement with a payment schedule. Portfolio investments, we require shareholders agreement and the company prospectus. Also, we require a copy of the agreement with the service provider through whom securities will be purchased, if applicable. For employee stock options, grants, and purchases, we'll require documented details of the employee stock option plan, if not already central bank approved. And we'd require the number and value of the shares for which the applicant is eligible to buy. For other investments, we require documented details of the investment. An example of this would be similar to a wholly Bahamian-owned company acquiring ownership in a foreign company. Next, taking a look at the ICM liberalization with respect to portfolio investments. Effective the 1st of June 2024, the central bank delegated authority to commercial banks, which allowed resident individuals to convert Bahamian to invest abroad, up to $100,000 annually. If John Doe wants to buy $100 in Bitcoin, he may conduct that transaction directly at the commercial bank and provide evidence of the investment. Let's take a look at the details around the portfolio investments. Portfolio investment instruments are cryptocurrency, stocks, securities, bonds, exchange-traded funds, mutual funds, and derivatives. The transaction must be conducted at one single bank and branch, and authorized dealers are required to check to confirm that the customer has not already utilized partly or the full allocated amount. They also would require appropriate documentation for tracking the customer's identity and future redemption of the 2.5% premium. Funds are to be paid directly to the service provider or entity responsible for the investment. The government stamp tax remains at 1.5%. Portfolio investments over $100,000 for resident individuals still requires the central bank approval. Also, wholly Bahamian-owned companies still requires central bank approval. For any portfolio investment, it does not matter the amount. And in both of these instances, they are required to submit an ICM purchase redemption form along with supporting documentation, and it can be emailed to ecd@centralbankbahamas.com. Now taking a look at the redemption. Upon partial or full liquidation of your investment, A premium redemption would only apply to the proceeds representing the original capital purchase through the ICM. These proceeds must be repatriated and sold through the ICM at the offer sell rate at the prevailing time of repatriation. The current rate is 2.5%. Redemption is applied on a pro-rata basis and only up to the total amount originally purchased. This means that the redemption would be proportioned based on the amount being redeemed at the time relative to the original capital purchased. This does not mean 2.5% every time. However, the 2.5% is distributed in proportion to the original capital purchase through the ICM. An ICM redemption form must be completed and submitted via the exchange control mailbox. Next, we'll take a look at Bahamian depository receipts. BDRs are publicly traded foreign securities listed on the Bahamas International Securities Exchange, known as BISEX. They are structured and marketed in Bahamian dollars. They are unsponsored issues, meaning that they are issued by a local depository agent without formal agreement with the foreign share issuer whose stock underlies the depository receipt. As these investments are made in Bahamian dollars, residents do not require the central bank approval to invest in these investment instruments. The central bank supports funding at the market rate for an unsponsored BDR program, which allows resident investors to acquire Bahamian dollar denominated interest in a fund that provides exposure to foreign securities. Currently, there are 5 licensed broker-dealers that participate in the BDR program, namely Carlisle's Pension Service Bahamas Limited, Leno Corporate Services Limited, Kalina Financial Advisors Limited, RF Bank and Trust Bahamas Limited, and Benchmark Advisors Bahamas Limited. Taking a look at the limits, in January of 2006, at the introduction of the investment program, the annual limit was set at 25 million or 6.25 million per quarter, or up to 5% of the external reserves at the previous year's end. Effective the 1st of April 2016, the annual limit was raised to 35 million or 8.25 million per quarter, provided that the amount is not equivalent to more than 5% of the external reserves of the country at the end of the previous year. Who's eligible to participate? Natural residents and companies, such as Bahamian citizens, permanent residents with no restriction on employment, residents wholly Bahamian-owned companies, other investment vehicles such as trusts or settlements wholly owned by or whose beneficiaries are wholly comprised of persons in this category. Then we have other investors, such as resident designated companies, and up to a maximum of 10% of the total issue offering per entity for equities and BDRs. There is no limit on private or public sector debt securities, and permanent residents with restrictions on employment and temporary residents are also eligible, and they can collectively up to a maximum of 10% of the total issue or offering per investor for the entities, BDRs, and debt securities listed on BISEX. However, there is a maximum investment limit as it relates to permanent residents and temporary residents, and this is a limit of 100,000, excluding capital gains and losses per person for public sector securities for which the central bank acts as registrar. Parents, my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Ashley, very much. Participants, please, you can use your the chat function to enter questions, or you can use the Q&A function. I also see a raised hand, so I'll start with Mr. Moss. Mr. Moss, you can go ahead. Are you able to unmute? Okay, in the meantime, in the chat, Ashley, we have a question of whether or not the $100,000 limit is annual or overall.
So the $100,000 limit is annual. It's per year. So you would just go to your commercial bank and show them whatever you want to invest in for portfolio investments, that is, and it's only related to resident individuals. So you would take your documentary evidence, and once you are over that limit, then you would be required to submit an application to the central bank.
Okay, so the next question is, if I want to invest abroad, do I have to do it through the central bank?
So can we have more specific information around invest in a portfolio investment asset, or what exactly?
Yes, portfolio investment.
So once it's under 100,000, you can go directly to one commercial bank and one branch, and then you must continue to use that same bank and branch afterwards until you reach the $100,000 limit.
Okay, the next question is about the brokers. The question reads, you indicated that there are 5 brokers. So one would have to go through one of those brokers in order to invest abroad.
Yeah, so they would, for BDRs, for Bahamian Depository Receipts, they would have to go through a licensed broker dealer in order to use that facility.
And just as a note, I note that a couple of people are just now joining, so they may have missed the bulk of the presentation. But we will provide the recording, the video recording of the presentation on our YouTube page. So you'll be able to access it there to watch it from the beginning. Okay, returning to the questions. This is another question related to the 100,000 delegated authority limit, whether or not it's annually from January 1st to December 31st, and then resetting on January 1st each year. So just confirmation on that.
Yes, it's from January 1st to December 31st each year.
Okay, someone is inquiring about investing in ETFs, whether or not this is something that the bank facilitates, or if they have to go a different route.
Yeah, so that's considered a portfolio investment. So they would be able to go directly to their commercial bank and conduct that transaction.
Okay. We have a question on who are the 5 brokers.
Okay, so the 5 brokers are Carlisle Pension Services, CFAL, RF Bank and Trust, Benchmark Advisors, and Leno Corporate Services.
Okay. I think there was a slide in your presentation on that as well, right?
Yes.
So you can also refer to the presentation once we've loaded it for ease of reference after the session. Okay, this question is asking if you are below the limit for the ICM, do you still have to provide any documents to the authorized dealers? And if so, what are the documents?
Yes. So let's say, for example, you want to invest in some Bitcoin and you use one of those websites. You would just provide a screenshot of you opening an account with that website as documentary evidence to the commercial bank to carry out that transaction. So you still have to provide documentary evidence to support the transaction.
Thank you, Ashley. The next question is, can you go over the redemption process for the 2.5% premium? Who is responsible for applying this to ensure that it's realized?
So the redemption, so you would go to your commercial bank you'd come to us to redeem, and then we would, once you make application to us, we would go through that process, and we would be able to give an approval based on you going through the ICM in the first instance. So you would submit the application, you would fill out the ICM redemption form. It's the same as the purchase form, what I showed earlier, and you would just indicate the amount that you are redeeming, and then you would submit that to ecd@centralbankbahamas.com.
Okay. So the next question, again, is relating to the timeline of the 100,000 per year, whether it's within the calendar year. So the example they're stating is whether you can use 100,000 in December 2025 and then again in January 2026.
Yeah, so it renews at the end of the calendar year. So January 1st would be a new $100,000 limit that's applied.
Okay, I got clarity on that. All right, so this question says that I am a private citizen without a business and want to buy cryptocurrency. They want to know whether or not they have to go through the ICM from the central bank for transactions allowing them to send the funds directly to the account, to their account.
What is their Bahamas immigration status? They said they are a private citizen.
Yeah, they just indicated that it's a private citizen.
Okay,
so I guess you could clarify the residency requirement.
Yeah, so we would need to clarify what exactly is their Bahamas immigration status in order to give an accurate answer.
But provided they are a Bahamian resident.
Yeah, if they are a Bahamian resident or natural or naturalized, or if they are permanent resident with no restrictions on employment, then they're able to access the ICM.
All right, so this question is inquiring about whether or not they can invest directly in the U.S. stock market, or if they have to do it through a broker-dealer, through a broker.
They can invest directly. Once it depends on what they're purchasing. So if they're using the stock market, that would fall. If it's under 100,000, they can do it directly at their bank. If it's over, then they would have to submit an application to us.
Okay, so they are specifying that it's 100,000.
So if it's 100,000, they can still go to their commercial bank. If it's $100,001, then they can come to us.
Okay. Mrs. Griffin Long, can you use the chat for your question, please? Okay, so this is a similar question about permissions to invest. Are you allowed to invest through online brokers as long as you provide evidence?
Yes, you can invest through online brokers once you carry the evidence through your bank, to your bank.
All right, so the next question is, would you be able to walk us through the process for someone to invest in a stock portfolio, for example, S&P, etc.? Would I be able to, would I require first to go to a broker like CFAL or RF to receive a BDR for the stock, then go to my bank to make the actual purchase? So they just want to know the steps or the process in order to facilitate that investment.
So the process for ICM or BDR? If they're using
They're
ICM,
referencing BDR,
mhm,
so perhaps you
okay.
could start there.
So if it's BDR, then you would go through a licensed broker dealer and they would guide you through the process. However, if it's ICM, then you can do the research. If you want to go with a licensed institution, then you can do that. But you can also invest on your own. So you can look up whatever stock you want to purchase, and then once you're ready to open up a investment account with that dealer, then you would go to your commercial bank if you're doing it on your own. If it's under 100,000, if it's not, you would come through us to do that, and you would provide us with the necessary information. However, if you're going through CFAL or someone of that nature, then they can walk you through the process of how to use the ICM or like Scotia Wealth per se.
Okay. The next question is whether or not persons are able to purchase, well, if they want to purchase precious metals, would they need to go through the ICM? You're on mute, Ashley.
Can you define precious metals? Is it like investing in gold, etc.?
Gold and silver. So they specified gold and silver. You're mute again, Ashley.
Okay, so I also have my manager on the call, Miss Stephanie Carter. Maybe she can give more insight on that.
Is she in the room? Okay.
So they still would have to come to us, because that wouldn't be considered a portfolio investment per se. But they can invest in precious metals.
Okay, so to confirm, yes, investments can be made in precious metals such as silver and gold. The next question is whether what's central bank's position on repatriation of funds, and is there any guidance given to authorized dealers on accepting inward remittances that are identifiably crypto sourced?
So once they come to us to repatriate, they would fill out the redemption form, and then the commercial bank would carry out the transaction. However, to say incoming wires, there isn't no limit on the incoming wires for crypto.
And then there's an inquiry as to would a person need to open up a U.S. bank account. You're muted.
So for a U.S. bank account, they would need to, if it's a Bahamian, they would need to make application to the central bank to open up a foreign currency account.
Okay. I think you would have touched on this, but perhaps briefly, can you indicate the process, well, the criteria for investments to the ICM over $100,000?
So it's in the slideshow presentation. So they would fill out an ICM purchase form, as I showed earlier, and then they would provide the supporting documentation necessary.
Okay. I guess further to the US bank account query, the participant is wondering if persons who want to buy US stock or invest in the US stock market would need to open up a US bank account in order to do that.
No, they wouldn't need to open a US bank account, a personal US bank account. However, investment accounts are opened.
Okay, so we have a lot of interest in investing in the US, the US stock market. The next question is, if I have a broker account with a platform in the US, then I would only need the bank's permission to transfer the funds to my US brokerage account to invest in the US stock market. I
Yes,
think, yeah, this was
if it's under
addressed earlier as
100,000,
well.
yes.
Okay. So we have another set of questions in the Q&A. But before I go to those, I'll just take one or two more questions from the chat. If you have a brokerage account, then a separate bank account is not. Oh, this is a response. 1 second. Are there any fees for repatriation of funds earned outside of the country for residents with right to work or work permit holders? Any fees or taxes?
So work permit holders, the ISIM would not be applicable to temporary residents per se. So temporary residents, they can freely send their funds out and receive their funds. The fees would be applicable by that financial institution.
Okay, so I will address some of the questions in the QEA, and we can return back to the chat. The first question is, what would be the central bank fee for repatriating 10,000? I think this probably requires an email or a call, but they're inquiring about the fee for repatriating 10,000 original investment and 5,000 in gains.
Yes, we'd be able to give more information once you contact us. We have our help desk is always available, so it's 302-2777.
Okay. Would you give them the email address as well, Ashley?
Yes, the email address is ECD, E as in Echo, C as in Charlie, D as in Delta, at centralbankbahamas.com.
All right. So you can reach out via phone or email for more specific questions. But for the most part, well, there are no fees. The central bank doesn't charge fees for transactions of that nature. Yes, the slides will be shared. They will be available on our website, as well as the recording of the session. We'll share that as well. In order to view those, you can either visit our website or just keep an eye out on our social media platforms for the notification that the material has been posted. Okay, so the next comment is related to the the Bahamian Companies Act. I understand that in the case of a Bahamian Companies Act wholly owned by Bahamian citizens, if approval is given for the company to participate in the ICM, the central bank will designate the company as a non-resident, and the company will not be able to hold Bahamian dollars. Is this correct? And they would also know, if this is the case, why that is. So we're not able to hear you, Ashley.
Okay, so I have Miss Stephanie Carter here with me as well, so she'll give an answer based on that.
Okay. Good morning.
Good
Yes.
morning.
So a company that is established by Bahamian for the sole purpose of investing abroad, we would designate or deem that company to be a non-resident company because the activity, for the most part, is offshore. It's holding offshore assets. But this company would be deemed non-resident, and it'll be deemed non-resident for the specific purpose for which it is approved. So if it is that the Bahamian would have come to us and said, listen, we set up this company in order to invest in, let's say, stocks, we would approve the company to invest in the stocks. We would outline the conditions of that approval, which means that it would be able to establish an investment account for the sole purpose of holding and managing those stocks. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Tiffany. The next question is related to the threshold for the ICM investment. How will banks prove that the client is providing correct info as the size of the ICM investment purchased thus far for the year?
So it's the responsibility of the bank to look back in their system to make sure that that person has not reached the $100,000 limit. And then they should be provided, we do trainings with the banks as well, but they should be provided with documentary evidence as it relates to the investment that's happening.
Thank you, Ashley. Our next question is, will our work permit holders allowed to use the ICM? And that would be based on residency. The second part of the question is can they purchase any amount of USD given that the amount comes from their salaries? So these would be non-resident, it appears.
So work permit holders, we classify them as temporary residents for exchange control purposes. And they're not eligible to use the ICM. However, they can just send their funds abroad to wherever they want to invest. And they would not require our central bank approval for that conversion. However, if they want to credit their local United States dollar account at a local institution here, that's where they would require our approval. So they wouldn't have to go to the ICM to invest abroad. They can just send their funds directly out.
Okay, the next question is, do regulated financial institutions collect the ICM premium and then remit this to the central bank? Or does it get retained by the institution?
So the financial institution, they collect the 2.5% premium, and then they remit 1.5%. They collect the 5% premium, sorry, and then 2.5% of that is held. 2.5% is the redemption part of it, and then the 1.5% is sent to the central bank to retain out of that 2.5%.
Okay, so continuing the same question, which entity is collecting? And I think you spoke to this. Which entity is collecting the premium and absorbing the cost of the premium redemption?
So yeah, the premium redemption. So once they come in to apply, they would get the 2.5%, but it would be based on the original capital purchased only. So they would still have to make that application through us in order to redeem. And then they would complete the ICM purchase redemption form, and we would basically give a redemption approval based on that.
Is there a minimum amount to invest is the next query.
No, there is no minimum. Once it's under, for portfolio investments, once it's under 100,000, they can do it directly with their financial institution.
Okay. I'll head back to the chat for some additional questions. And then some of the questions that are being raised are being addressed in the chat feature. So please also keep an eye out there for some direct responses. All right, so as a citizen, does having a US account here in the Bahamas for the sole purpose of investing in a brokerage account like Charles Schwab International offer any upside? Now, that particular question, I think may be a bit subjective.
I think it would be up to
And
the investment advisor to.
yeah. I guess continuing the question, is it if it's the same as if you're using your Bahamian dollar account to fund a brokerage account? Are they still subject to 5% premium along with the whatever bank wire fees the bank may impose?
No, so the fees are in the 5%. So all the fees are in the 5%. You can, if you email us or call us, we can probably send you the fees facts on the ICM.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the questions. Please let me know if I missed anyone. But as we indicated, the presentation as well as the recording will be made publicly available so that you can have a very easy reference point for a lot of the material, for a lot of the information that was shared in terms of the process, the thresholds, the brokers, the broker listing, and all the relevant contact information for our exchange control colleagues. Again, the email address would be ecd@centralbankbahamas.com. And you can also make queries using their hotline number that was also shared. That help desk line, the help desk line is 302-2777. So I'm just gonna wait one more second to see if anything else, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so I think we all right, this question is, if I buy 100,000 from a central bank to invest in a US stock market, I need to need an investment account with my bank in the Bahamas, and that will be denominated in US dollars, is the query. I think they're asking, and you probably spoke to this already. I think they're asking about whether or not they have to have a US denominated account, a domestic US denominated account, in order to facilitate that 100,000 investment.
Yeah, so investment accounts, they wouldn't be able to open it up through a financial institution here. Well, bank here, a local authorized dealer here. They can open it up with licensed authorized agents, such as maybe Honda Bank or C-File per se.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. And thank you everyone for joining the call. I did indicate that the information will be available, both the slides and the recording, for public access. Please follow our social media platforms, that's Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, for notifications to when these things are available. And please feel free to reach out to both the Exchange Controls Department for your direct questions regarding investment abroad. And you can also reach out to the External Relations Department if you have any other general queries and need information. Thank you so much again, Ashley, for your presentation. I know you had quite a lot of questions. I think you spent more time answering questions than actually presenting. So thank you very much for your thorough responses and your patience in addressing the questions as they come in. So everyone, you're welcome. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Well, the rest of morning and afternoon. Please look out for notifications for the next Learning Series event, which again will be shared if you're not on our mailing list via our social media platforms. Thank you.